Hey there, how's it going? At this point, no one's shocked that I did another game jam, right? It's just my favorite form of making a small experience that I hope others will enjoy. I'm still working on other long-term projects, but my enjoyment in game creation is design. How do different mechanics connect with players, and what can I do to make those connections better? I have so many unfinished projects where I just try out an idea because it's stuck in my head. And game jams allow me to take an idea like that and put a little bit more behind it. In the end of the day, I just really like making things. And if you want to make things fast and easy, you'll want to check out the sponsor of this video, Core. Core is the new free game creation platform that lets you build, publish, and play games. It's an amazing platform to quickly get started designing and building experiences for players, especially if you want to create a 3D multiplayer game without all the hassle. Simply pick a framework and start building your own games right away using thousands of free, high-quality music, sound, and art assets. All of it with no coding required. But if you really want to dig in, Core lets you create your own game logic using Lua. You can build games from scratch or remix and reimagine content shared by other creators. And when it's time to publish, your game will go live in the Core platform with the click of a button. Starting September 16th, Core is teaming up with the Global Game Jam for an all-new jamming experience. Form unique worlds for players to explore and enjoy. Plus, Core will be working with the Global Game Jam to make sure that your Game Jam site gets $100 just by you finishing and sharing your game. Thank you to Core for supporting this channel and allowing me to make more content for everyone. Core is completely free with plenty of great resources to get started, so be sure to check it out by clicking the link in the description. Because of the number of game jams I participate in, I get questions along the lines of how do you pick the jams you do? And for the most part, I pick them based on whether or not they seem fun. Sometimes size is a consideration as well. I mean, who wouldn't want to be able to say that they took part in a game jam with over 18,000 participants? The fact that I can also say that I did well in that jam still surprises me. But more often than not, I like the smaller community-driven jams the most. So, when White Vault, a friend of mine and fellow streamer, announced that he was hosting a jam, I was in. I've been fairly busy as of late, and I wasn't sure how much time I would actually have to work on a game. But I figured I could dedicate a few streams to making something for the jam. That gives me something to do on my open days on streams, and I won't have to take up my other free time, which always feels like I never have enough. The jam timeline was 2 weeks, which is even better. I figured I could scope the game as if it was a 48-hour jam, and then just make that game over the 2-week time period. Well, if you read the title, you know where I'm going with this, and the fact that that didn't happen, so let's get started. Since this jam was 2 weeks, the one thing I can say is that I never felt stressed out about time, which was a really nice change of pace when participating in a game jam. I was very cautious to keep my scope limited though. Thanks to the number of jams I've done, I've developed a decent heuristic around the amount of time it takes for me to implement different ideas. So I tried to be very conscious about not allowing myself to add in a bunch of extra stuff that would take too much time. Okay, the jam details. This was a for fun game jam. No judging, no winning, no losing, no prizes. It's all about making a game because making a game is fun. The jam does have a limitation and a theme, which is my favorite format. The limitation for this was 3 levels, and the theme is, here, take one. I've said this before, but sometimes a theme just clicks and you have a direction right away. Other times, it feels like you're pulling teeth. Luckily, this time it was actually the former. I toyed around with a few ideas, but pretty quickly, passing out flyers on the street took root. I just couldn't get the idea of handing out flyers saying, here, take one, out of my head. I began brainstorming ideas with my Twitch chat, and we eventually settled on a top-down shooter mechanic. But instead of firing bullets or magic spells at angry opponents, you're throwing flyers at unsuspecting NPCs. But you can only give them one or they're going to get angry with you. There'll be a timer, and you'll have to give out as many flyers as you can before the time runs out. In a game jam, this is pretty much enough for me to start testing mechanics and see how they feel. I've made several top-down games like this, so the initial setup was fairly standard. I added a player collision box, attached an arm to it to follow the mouse pointer, and created a projectile that would shoot out of the end of the arm. By changing the projectile's acceleration to a negative number, the flyers will slow after thrown until they stop moving. Now that we have the ability to throw flyers, it's time to add in those poor unsuspecting town peoples that we will be throwing said flyers at. For now, they'll be played by these squares that change color when they're given a flyer. I was going back and forth on whether or not the players should have infinite flyers or a finite number. That way, if they miss a shot, they have to go pick it up. I don't try to make statements in my games or anything like that, but I didn't really like the idea of the player being able to just spam flyers all over the place, or as we like to call them, garbage, and then just have them magically disappear. so I went with a limited number that the player can hold. Then I used the last of the stream that day to add a timer system. My plan was to pick the game up again the following week on stream, but I took some time off from making videos because every now and then you just start to burn out and breaks are necessary. This meant I had a bit more time over the weekend than I usually do, and it turns out that as I got into it, I really like this gameplay. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I built out a rough level layout and placed NPCs around, but it's not really much fun with them just standing there. If you've seen my other games and devlogs, you may have noticed I don't do much with AI. I usually avoid it and just make enemies or other such things move back and forth on assigned behavior. Unfortunately, that wasn't really gonna work here. I tried a few different ways to make the NPCs move, and I eventually started using the pathfinding behavior that's built into Construct 3. I've never actually used this before, and it worked really well. So all that happens is on the start of the layout, each NPC chooses a position around them that's within a 200 pixel radius. If a path can be made from their position to the new one, then the NPC moves along that path, waits for a short amount of time, and then picks another position. If the chosen position can't be reached, then it just picks again. And that's it. This is all the code for the NPC's movement. It's so simple, but they run around all chaotically, and when you're trying to throw something to them, it actively feels like they're trying to make you miss. When I was working on the 4 Game Devs Jam off the same art kit game, I had to scrap the ability to enter buildings due to time, but I really liked the effect. So I added that in here with a simple camera zoom that I've been using a lot lately. With a good base in, I need to start on the art. My usual jam process is to come up with an idea, get a mostly working prototype of the mechanics, then start figuring out art in case I need to make adjustments to the mechanics to fit the art. So far, this process has worked pretty well for me. As always, I start the art by picking a color palette, and as usual, I got it from lowspec.com. I added an extra personal restriction to myself this jam as well. I normally work in a resolution of 32 by 32 or larger, and typically color palettes are a starting point that I add to as needed. For this jam, I set the challenge for myself to work at a 16 by 16 resolution and only use a 16 color palette. No adding extra colors. This was really hard for me. Why, you may ask? Because why make it easier on yourself? This kind of thing is fun. I don't know, maybe I'm just weird. I went with the Sweetie 16 palette made by Graphics Kid, who also makes really great art. If you want to use the palette for yourself, there's a link in the description. With the palette selected, I started on the most important art piece in the whole game, the main character sprite. I made a kid sprite that I thought was super cute, and it passed the wife test, which involves me showing my wife the sprite. If she goes, "Aww," I consider it good. I made the animations and realized I wanted the player to have a throwing animation, but it would need to work while running and standing still. I could just make multiple versions of running and idle to have both the normal state and the throwing state, or I could just cut the sprite into 3 pieces and attach them all back together in the engine. By having the different art sprites separate, this allows me to have the player's leg animations work with the keyboard movement inputs, while the body and held flyers read from the mouse inputs. I tried having the player always facing the mouse, which is typical of these types of games, but the way I set up these animations, it just looks wrong. So the sprite mirroring always follows the movement, and the held flyers are always following the mouse. With the character in, I started to realize that I've overscoped myself in a way that I'm not used to. Usually, I think of overscoping as adding in more gameplay features that need more and more time as you go along. But here, I need to make a whole town or city. I've never done that before, and it's gonna need a lot of art. And I added more pressure to myself because, again, this jam is hosted by my friend Whitevault, who is an amazing pixel artist and whose work I just really love. So I can't just let myself slap any old pixel anywhere. In my mind, I have to make this look good. After many hours of back and forth, I was able to get something that I was actually happy with. I thought it would be fun to have the player hand out flyers for an arcade, which caused me to think that the game is actually set in the 80s, but that's mostly just my headcanon. But really, when's the last time you saw a grand opening for an arcade anywhere in the last 20 years? I continued adding more town elements on the stream the next day, as well as a few Easter eggs for Whitevault and my own Twitch community. And don't forget those familiar looking game posters on the arcade itself. Are you old like me? Can you guess what games these are? That night, I updated more art and added it into the game. I took a very lazy approach here. The correct way to go about this would probably be to cut up all of the art into a sprite sheet and then add it to a tile map and draw it out in the engine. But instead, to save time, I just imported the whole thing as is. Then I went back in and cut out specific elements that the player would need to do things like move behind. I'm sure there's a lot of good reasons not to do this. But since I'm working with a base sprite size of 16 by 16, this whole image is only 1708 pixels by 960 pixels, which is under Construct's sprite size limit, so win for me. The next day on stream, we started on the art for the NPCs. I set them up like the player, cut into 3 pieces: legs, torso, and head. At the start of the level, each NPC picks a type. They can either be one of two adult types or a child. If it's one of the two adult types, it just picks a random look and goes with it. Then the head is set to invisible because the child's head is actually part of the torso sprite, because they're small. This led to a pretty humorous bug where the city had a bunch of random headless NPCs running around. What happened was they were set to be children, so because of that the head was not visible, but for some reason the rest of the sprites didn't update and it still chose the adult versions to put in. Also, they run backwards because at this point I haven't yet set up the mirroring for them. And last thing to set up on the stream, we made the boss sprite. No, not that kind of boss. Yeah, that kind. I honestly don't know which one's worse. And I was way too happy about this angry animation. Up next was a lot of boring dialogue and shop setup. Your boss yells at you at the start of each level, and at the end of the level you get paid and are able to buy upgrades. I kept all the upgrades fairly simple, where really all I had to do was go in and change a few values to make the upgrade work. The skates, for instance, make you move faster, but they decrease your deceleration. So you roll to a stop, which makes sense, as well as adding a slight drawback to the ability. For throwing distance, you can upgrade to rolled up flyers, which will travel further and faster when thrown. And then after that, you can get paper airplanes, which go even further. And the last upgrade you have as an option, possibly the least exciting, but pretty helpful for newer players it seems like, is a bag upgrade that allows you to hold more flyers than you normally can. The game only allows you to hold so many flyers before you have to go back to the flyer distribution table to get more. The game was starting to feel pretty good at this point, and I had the main game loop in, so I messaged my friend Gingerbeard, who helps me out with a lot of different stuff, to playtest and see what he thought. Construct 3 has a remote preview feature that lets me send him a link and see him playing, all without ever leaving the engine. I don't have to export or do anything else. I've been using this a lot lately, and I really like it. Gingerbeard seemed to really enjoy the game and wanted to keep playing, which is always a good sign. He also had a bunch of great suggestions that I implemented, but the biggest one was to add a couple more flyer pickup tables around the level. At this point, the only place to restock was the table in front of the arcade, which had the negative effect of keeping the player from exploring the rest of the town because they didn't want to get too far away from their resupply. And while this helped, I think I should have done a better job to help the player locate where the tables were in the city. They change where they are each round, which isn't helpful if you don't know where they are already. In retrospect, I should have added an indicator that pointed to the nearest table or something like that. It's definitely something I'll keep in mind for future games. At this point, the actual gameplay is mostly done. It's just a lot of polish, sound, and a menu. I added in more variety for NPCs so it's not always the same looking people. I used SFXR to make a bunch of sound effects as well as pulled a few from some audio libraries that I've purchased. I threw together a menu where this time I tried something a little different. Usually my Game Jam menus are kinda crap. I just slap them together and hope it doesn't break. If I have time, I try to add a button for how to play that people could click on to read the instructions, but I don't think people usually do that. Either that or I put the how to play in the description. This time, I tried adding the controls and how to play instructions first thing on the menu, super big so you can't miss it. I'll have to see how it plays out, but I've seen a couple people stream the game already, and it has seemed to be helpful. So this may be the approach I adopt for future game jams. The next day was the deadline, but I was going to get to stream first. So with the help of my Twitch chat, we chose and added music, as well as some other indicators to hopefully make things a little clearer to the player. Then I did a quick export and posted the game privately to itch to allow the chat to try out the game and tell me if they found any bugs. I've never been able to do this before because I'm usually crunched for time and I never actually have the ability to just throw it up and see what people think. But it ended up being super helpful. Thank you to everybody that was there and tried it out and gave suggestions, because there was a bunch of bugs or just confusing elements that we were able to fix that I probably wouldn't have caught otherwise. Then after the stream, I made the art for the itch page and submitted the game. It's funny, I really wasn't planning to spend this amount of time on this game. When I started, I said I was going to maybe put a couple of streams worth of work into it. But it became something I really enjoyed working on, so I just stayed up late several nights tinkering away. I feel like the aesthetics and the gameplay are super enjoyable and the concepts are cute and fun. I tried to make the game fairly easy, but I have already heard that some people have struggled to reach their quota and they get frustrated, which I feel a little bad about. I would have liked to have added special cases if the player was struggling, but unfortunately, I just didn't have the time to be able to change any of that, so right now, if you don't make your quota, you just don't get paid. That's definitely one area where I think the game could be made a little more user-friendly. In the end, I'm really pleased with this game, and I'm super happy that I put the time in that I did. Again, I didn't mean to stay up till 3, 4 in the morning, multiple nights working on this, but I was enjoying it so much that I just kept doing it. If you want to check this game out, or any of the other games that were made for this jam, the links are all down below. If you give it a try, I would love to hear your thoughts. Thank you to Whitefall for hosting this blast of a jam and picking such an awesome theme. Please make sure to check him out on Twitch if you want to see some incredible pixel art. Thank you all very much for watching. I'd like to give an extra special shout out to my patrons, especially Abby Sean, MLK, Straight Up Gruntled, David Scott, Soapy Gnome, Liam Sorta, Nazar Salim, Scott Hansen, and Nightfall. You're all awesome people, and I truly appreciate the support. And one final thank you to the sponsor of this video, Core. Don't forget to check it out, it's completely free, just click the link in the description. If you'd like to play this or any of my other games, you can visit vimlark.itch.io. To get in contact with me, you can stop by my Twitch streams, message me on Twitter, or join the Discord with a lot of other really cool people. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and I will talk with you next time. Have a good one. Later.